Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto, Willies. Welcome to Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto Willies, your host. We have a great show out for you today. Folks, please get ready. Please, no fear. I know right now folks are looking at the polls and they're, my God, why are these polls so close? Why is it so close, folks? It is close because, again, negative advertising work, yes, but we have to persevere and give the message. Not only the message, point out how people are really going to be better. I know there's a cult out there. I know there's also people that Donald Trump is able to convince to be fearful, but let's step back. This race is still in Kamala's hands because she's a better person, because she's more qualified, and because we've been through this before in 2016, and we will not make the same mistakes again. So without further ado, I have quite a bit for the program. Okay, I'm going to do this video faster than I expected to and less polished than I expected to because, again, I've been getting these calls, these emails, friends, PDR posse. Everybody's concerned. Is this race getting away from us? Oh, my God, is Kamala going to lose? Let me first tell you, first of all, that the polls that have come out, even the New York polls that shows a tightening race that have come out, in those polls, I still see a Kamala winning, even as I see those polls as undercounting what Democrats will do if we do the job we said we're going to do. So first of all, let me tell you, stop worrying. And every time you feel like worrying, remind somebody who you know may not vote or somebody who always throws their hands up and say, I can't make a difference. Remind them to vote. But let's go ahead and beforehand, I want you to listen to a pollster as far as Donald Trump and a ceiling. Remember, these are just Republicans who hate Donald Trump, who don't want to vote for Donald Trump, but deep in their soul, they're Republicans and they feel it is heresy to vote for a Democrat. There's a ceiling there, and they have all come home. In other words, they've all come to Trump. So what you see is not a Kamala dropping, but you see the Republicans coming home with Kamala still having room to grow as she consolidates not only her base, but the people like, let's say, Liz Cheney and others out there that are pushing those or giving some permission. It is okay to vote for Kamala. I want you to listen to this pollster, and then we'll take it on the other side.
48-51 is 48-51.
Yeah.
To a certain extent is where the horse race wants to go, right? And when you look in sort of the internals of the NBC poll, all of his supporters are now in our polling of his job, right? That's part and parcel what you have happening. And when you go underneath that, look at what's happening underneath that. Approval rating 72% among rural voters. It's underwater among suburban voters. So some of those dynamics are still there, but that 48-51, I got a feeling that's where the election wants to go. And consistently in the polling, he's a 47-48% candidate, not only in polling. An ABC poll has out today where has her I think her 51, him like 47 or 48 also. So this asymmetric sort of conversation about what she's got to do, I think is interesting because he has a ceiling.
It never goes above 47. I mean, we've talked about 47%, Lonnie, and yet Republicans are coming home. The non-MAGA Republicans seem to be coming home, but he can't get above that 47%. What does that tell you?
You are seeing coalescence amongst Republican voters. And I think that the self-identified block of Republicans who are, quote, non-MAGA is definitely decreasing. I think there's a few reasons for that. First of all, I do think that there is a recognition amongst the issue that Republicans care most about, which is immigration. I mean, if you look at this poll, every poll that we see, it is immigration. There's a lot of contrast on that issue. And I think Trump has successfully driven contrast on that issue. And those voters are coming home because of immigration. I would also say that there's a positive view, I mean, to your point, about his administration's policies on the other issue they care about, which is cost of living. And so that contrast on issues is quite significant. That is coalescing Republicans. And I think that is the single reason why his numbers have improved significantly over these last several weeks.
And the good piece of news for Vice President Harris, Lynn, is the fact that abortion is at the top of the list in terms of what voters say is going to turn them out to vote.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why, in part, you see this gender divide in this polling. Abortion is a big issue for Kamala Harris. She is winning this issue. And that's what not only Democratic voters, but it seems like some independent voters really care about this too. She's talking about freedom and the freedom to control your own body, which is really important. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is really trying to expand that gender divide by focusing on men. Everything that he has done in his campaign has been, to increase his support among men.
It's an historic gender gap, Monica. So that is where this battle is going to be fought and won, it seems.
Absolutely. And we certainly saw with former President Obama's comments in the last couple of days, specifically aimed at men, with his message also that he delivered to black men. This is an area where the Harris campaign knows they're going to be targeting and laying out more new ads specifically with black men, talking about why they support the vice president. They're going to be leaning into that. But on abortion as well, in this point with the gender gap, after Labor Day, the Harris campaign decided we're going to have a reproductive freedom event every single day in a swing state until the election. And they view that as really a key part of their strategy.
Reproductive rights is Republicans chasing the car and catching it. This is the dog chasing the car and catching it, right? And I said this going into the last midterm. It is a mobilizing issue on the left in a way we have not seen before. So we're going into another election where I think Democrats are going to overperform because of the mobilizing effect of abortion rights.
So let me be clear first. I am not saying the polls are wrong at all based on the information that they're getting. What I'm saying is what the polls are not going to measure is the largest magnitude in any particular direction. And what we see in the field is a lot different than what the pollster or whom the pollster asks, etc. And by the way, people like to talk about an undercount for Trump because of what happened in 2016 and to some extent 2020. There's no undercount now because people are proud. Those who are voting for Donald Trump are proud to say they're voting for Donald Trump. They no longer cower. He has created that environment that people no longer have any shame in supporting rapists and supporting that sort of, in supporting misogynists, all that kind of stuff. Oh, that's water under the bridge. Donald Trump has changed the psyche, I think, irrecoverably. But that said, the decent people that remain, the people that remain that will do the right thing, far exceeds those who are simply going to say, I can't leave my party. And it's important to note that that when you look at the things that people are complaining about, it mostly shows the success of the campaigning by Trump and his minions as far as being able to tell bold-faced lies, being able to tell all these things in ads and not being called out effectively by a media or likewise by the Kamala Harris campaign. Let me give an example. People still believe that they have more information as far as what the Trump economy would be than the economic policies of Trump than they have of the economic policies of Kamala Harris, even as Kamala Harris has a barrage of information as far as what she'll do in all these different areas from giving business credits to child credits to issue after issue after issue, right? Home credits, etc. Donald Trump, you can't really name much. And when he comes out and he names a few things, economist tells you his will cause inflation as well as reduce our output. Hers will increase our output and would not be inflationary. I mean, it is out there. The real data is out there, but it seems like you have to search for the real data while the Trump administration, or rather the Trump people, are able to throw out lies, and half of them go unchecked and they go out en masse. We can also talk about they have a belief that things were better under Donald Trump, forgetting that Donald Trump was in charge during the pandemic. In fact, the pandemic, which is the one that caused the demise of the economy, the largest unemployment rate, etc., was caused under his administration for a pandemic that he mishandled. But somehow people just think about the 3 years he was in office under the Obama economy and don't take into account what he actually did to wreck the economy. Like I've said all of the times, the data is out there that shows Republicans constantly wreck the economy. The Democrats have to come back and fix it. And as it's being fixed, Republicans demagogue the time it takes to fix the economy to come back in and take the credit for the economy fixed by Democrats and throw it right back into a spin. These are narratives that need to be out there that are never out there that don't, let's look at the inflation narrative. Immediately, the Harris campaign from the beginning of the campaign should say the inflation was caused by policies of Donald Trump. One, the mishandling of the economy and creating the mishandling of the pandemic, which created the supply chain problem for the portion of the inflation caused by the supply chain problem. And the rest of the inflation was caused by his colleagues who created policies that are inflationary. And the other part, and all of this I've proved in several other blogs. Please go through all my blogs and videos where I've discussed all of this in detail. All the inflation, forget about what many of these economists tell you. Not some of the inflation with corporate greed. Not a few of the inflation was caused by Biden printing money. None of that is true. If Biden printing money would have caused inflation, we'd have had inflation under the Iraq war. We'd have inflation under the Afghanistan war. We didn't. Even though money was being printed like a machine gun. We have sovereign currency. All of that I've discussed before. But we don't take it head on. We don't need to give explanations as to why exactly these things occurred. What we need to say is Donald Trump created the inflationary period that was handed off to Joe Biden because, one, he mismanaged the pandemic, and that's over. Donald Trump created what you're having in the grocery store, right? I mean, you need to make assertions as they do because the people sort of believe assertions given with bravissimo. But we go ahead and we say, well, it's the problem really was we're building on the and Biden has built plants in Kentucky. He has built plant in West Virginia. And those jobs that these union folks are getting, they're getting because of him. And by the way, the increase in prices, wages, and overtime, it's because of Biden, while Trump says it's going to take it away from you. And you make these assertive statements. There are tools right now when you're writing. I use helper tools as I'm writing to improve my way of communication, to improve the way I write. And sometimes I will pass my paragraphs through a common tool that just about everybody uses now. And it'll say, you may want to make this paragraph more assertive. Take it out of the passive tense because that is what people respond to. And that is what has to be done. So do not worry about the election. Each individual has the ability within their sphere of influence, and all of us have a sphere of influence. So if we have just a million people that are concerned about this election, if that million people work with their sphere of influence, the people that follow them on Facebook, the people they talk to at the grocery store, the people they talk to at the coffee shop, you give them that positive message. that assertive message, why we are going to elect somebody else and not somebody who brought us down, and get that seed planted in their minds. When they walk into that booth, or when they fill out that ballot, absentee ballot, or when they fill out that mail ballot or whatever, that seed that you planted in their head will be there. I've seen Trump. I've seen Biden. I've seen the factories. I've seen this. You have to remind them. You have to remind them to see what their eyes are seeing. But folks, that's not all. That's not all. Susan Glazier from the New Yorker, she said something that really touched me on the panel. And I want you to listen to her, and then we'll take it on the other side.
We're 9 years into the Donald Trump era. This is the third consecutive election that Republicans have nominated Donald Trump. That's never happened in Republican Party history before. We have not reelected a president who was defeated in more than 100 years, and only once in American history. Donald Trump challenged the results of a legal election for the first time in American history. He refused to accept the results. He has said things that are outside the mainstream of any candidate. And if Americans are going to return him to office, that's going to tell us something very important about
Yes, there is a very small chance, a minute chance that Donald Trump could win. Very small chance. But if that were to occur, at that point, what it would tell us about ourselves is that, like every empire, like every major nation over this millennia, even as they weren't supposedly advanced as we are, that we will go down like all the rest. The thing about it is, it doesn't have to be that way, right? It absolutely doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to go down because of misinformation, lies. We don't have to go down because of an alternate reality. We don't have to go down because we have stopped critically thinking. Remember, the policies of the right is to keep you dumb, because if you're dumb, anything I tell you, you may start to believe and then vote against your own interests, which is what anybody who votes for Trump is doing, except for the multi-billionaires, the super high multimillionaires. Everybody that votes for him, they're voting against their own interests. Now, we've had for a long time enough people not voting against their own interests for us to move forward, even as he accidentally got elected with not a majority of the vote. We had a Biden who really ran up the vote to ensure he was elected. And I think the same thing is about to happen with Kamala Harris. If you and I and everybody else do the job, and everybody else do the job, because again, remember, there's still most of us who are willing to critically think. There's still most of us, even with all our prejudices and all that we have, that we still love our mother, our father, our daughter, our sister, and everybody else. I'm going to say, even if I am concerned about certain issues, the vote, as my daughter put on one of her TikToks recently, when you go to vote, you're not voting for yourself. You're voting for your family. You're voting for your relatives. You're voting for your friends. You're voting for those who you care for. You're voting for America. And if someone like Liz Cheney, who said, I don't agree with Kamala Harris on policy, but we are in existential times. And at this point in time in our history, all the things that I've ever said about liberals and progressives and whatever, the one thing I know is that we all love our country, or most of us love our country. And we won't allow a Donald Trump to come in and destroy that which we have been building for centuries. We won't allow him to come in and destroy that. So folks, stop worrying and go out there with a smile on your face, with a joy in your heart, and win this thing. And I'm not talking about win this thing on the margins. I'm talking about win this thing big, because it's out there for the taking.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.
After gorging on stock buybacks for years, Boeing announces mass layoffs. The corporate cure is always the same: layoff workers, said one critic. Stock buybacks and layoffs are joined at the hip. It's time that they're outlawed entirely. And we know our orange person is of the raiding corporate ilk that actually costs most people their jobs when it costs their jobs. If you take a look at where most of his support is, Appalachian parts of Ohio, Appalachian parts of Pennsylvania, Appalachian parts of America. These are places where the policies supported by plutocrats like himself, like Elon Musk and Thiel, who founded PayPal, etc. These are the people that actually is hurt by these guys, right? Remember Elon Musk on an interview with Trump when Trump says, "I hate to pay overtime," or when workers strike, just let them go, fire them. That's Trump. That's the guy who many in the working class think they would want to vote for. So here's the story about stock buybacks. The manufacturing giant Boeing, under the leadership of new CEO Kelly Ortberg, announced Friday that it will axe roughly 10% of its total workforce in the coming months, a move that drew attention to the company's massive spending on stock buybacks in recent years. For those who don't understand what stock buybacks, let me tell you. You hear me rant about the class in this country that do no work at all, but they are the ones who profit from your labor. In other words, if you work for Exxon or you work for Madison, whoever you work for, that's a corporation. What that corporation has done, or what made that a corporation, is they have taken that corporation and split it into millions of pieces, and those millions of pieces are called stocks. And those stocks are then sent to Wall Street or some other market, and they're traded. I may want to buy 10. Let's say that company is valued at $10 billion. I created 10 billion stocks worth $10 each. That's the initial value of that stock. And then I go ahead and throw that onto a market, and people who want to own my company, let's say my company is XYZ company, worth $10 billion, traded on the market originally at $10 billion, $10 a share. They can exchange those. If I get tired of owning XYZ, I can go ahead and trade XYZ. If people think XYZ is going to make a lot of money, they may buy XYZ for more than the actual face value of that stock, which was, remember, the company is valued at $10 billion. I created 10 billion stocks. So each stock is worth $10. But I may sell that stock for $12. The person who got that stock for the person who sold that stock for $12 made what's called an appreciation of $2, right? That's what they call, it's an income. It's income from that stock, known as capital gains. It's capital that gained $2. So whenever you hear people talk about capital gains, you're talking about how much that stock has made over what it was purchased for. I want to back up a bit, because not because a company is valued at $10 billion means that it has $10 billion worth of assets. Let's give a small example. Let's say you have a restaurant. You built a restaurant, and that restaurant, the building for that restaurant is worth $100,000. And let's say all the equipment in that restaurant is worth $200,000. And let's say you sell approximately $100,000 worth of stuff a month, right? And let's say of that 100,000, you have a 10% profit. The basal value of that stock, based on what the business is worth, is the value of the value of the hardware, which is the building is worth $100,000, the equipment is worth $200,000. That's $300,000 for that building, right? I mean, for that business. So technically speaking, if I created 100,000 stocks for that business, the asset value, the value of that stock should be no more than about $3. But then people put all kinds of things into it. They say, well, that company is going to make $100,000 a year, which would then give me a dividend. Right? A dividend mean the profit from that company based on how much it makes says that okay, if that company makes $100,000 and 10,000 of that $100,000 is profit, then that divided amount of profit into the amount of stocks is the amount that is an optimal value that you could pay in dividend. There are other things people may do. They may have to pay taxes. There's a whole lot of stimulation. But the thing about it is basically a company is not the stock value, the total stock value of a company usually far exceeds what that company would be if you could just sell off all its assets, because they take into consideration things like how much that company is going to make over time, etc. Now, Trump created a company called Truth Social, which was pretty much a fraud, because that particular company had very little value in hardware, meaning buildings, etc. It had very little of that. Most of it exists in the cloud. So there's no real asset value for that company. But somebody decided to value that company, let's say, $2 billion, right? Or $3 billion, whatever it's worth. There is no correlation between the amount of stock that was sold for Truth Social, Trump's business, and what it actually is worth. In fact, it makes under $1 million a year in revenue, but its stock's valuation when it was released was several $billion. It was a complete fraud. It's a way to give Trump money without it being a gift. It's a way of using the fraudulent capitalist system to do that. So I hope you understand a little bit about stocks and its relationship to companies and value. Now let's go back to the Boeing story. Because Boeing has some stock value. The company is worth X amount of dollars. They printed X amount of stocks, and the stocks have a certain value. A lot of executives in these companies are actually paid. They get their salaries, and they're also paid in something called stock options. Stock options is exactly what it sounds like. The option to buy the company stock at a certain price. Now, what the government has started to allow since Reagan that it didn't allow before is for a company to take its profits and instead of returning those profits to the shareholders as dividends, which get taxed at regular standard worker wages rate, what these companies would do when they have excess profits is go onto the open market and buy their own stocks. In other words, take the stocks that company have, and the company now buys it back, which reduces the amount of stocks, which increases the price of that stock. The executive, now because he was compensated in shares of stock, makes a whole lot more money, and the shareholders, their stock, without doing any work, without doing anything, that, let's say that $1,000, that $1 million worth of stock that they own is suddenly worth $2 million because the company bought back its shares, which created less shares on the market for the same company, which increased the price of the shares. They make a lot of money for doing absolutely nothing. And who pays? Well, because now they've used profits for giving stock value backs. They don't reinvest into planes, Boeing. They don't reinvest into safety. They don't reinvest into new equipment to do things necessary to keep their product safe. So what happens is you get now Boeing planes falling out of the sky, killing a lot of people, getting sued. You get workers that continue to get paid much at a lesser increased rate than the executives who just sit back, sell stocks, exchange stocks, etc. So these workers do what they should do. They strike the company. And when they strike the company says, "Oh, you're asking for too much. We're leaving the bargaining table." And what is Boeing's solution then? Boeing's solution is to say, okay, a lot of you are striking. We can't build as many planes. The 767, we're going to go ahead and let it go. We're not going to build any more 767s. We are going to go ahead and cut 17,000 workers, 10% of our workforce, because you won't take the crumbs that we want to give you. Even as our old CEO who wrecked the company, we fired him, but in the process of firing him, we gave him $45 million as a golden parachute. And the new CEO this year alone will make a salary of $22 million. That's the kind of economy we live in. That's the kind of economy too many support. But what happens, my brothers and my sisters, is that this is something most people don't understand. And they don't want you to understand this, because what you find out is it's not hyperbole when I call most workers who work for corporations indentured servants on the way to antiseptic slavery. People get mad when I say that. Some callers call and say, I'm no slave. And what I'm saying is, once you understand how our economic system works, both from a stock perspective, both from a tax-paying perspective, I neglected to tell you that one of the reasons that they want to buy back stocks to increase the value of the stock as opposed to paying a large dividend on the profits is because dividends are taxed at the rates regular Americans are paying taxes on. But capital gains, the increase in price of that stock when sold, that massive amount of money that they get instead of dividends is taxed at a much lower rate than the average person's salary. In other words, we make sure that the wealthy stays wealthy, and not only stays wealthy, but rip you off legally, while the worker goes into work every day, does his work, etc. Donald Trump is given a pass all of the times. Donald Trump cannot be attacked by the mainstream media as they should, because Donald Trump is the instantiation of our economic system on steroids. Somebody that has created nothing but massively profits from the labor of everybody and fools you into believing he is your savior. Me and only I alone can do it, says Trump. And in order to do that, he scares the bejesus out of you. He makes you believe that you are in danger. Those migrants are coming to get you. Those migrants are killing you. He goes to Aurora, Colorado yesterday and he preaches out there. They're taking over the country. They're emptying their prisons and sending them to Aurora, Colorado, to Springfield, Ohio. And for the people of non-thinking mind, or the people of little news exposure, they go to work every day. They drive their cars every day in Aurora, Colorado, a beautiful town, a beautiful city of 400,000 people. You drive the freeways, you drive the highways, you drive the neighborhoods, and you don't see crime. Yeah, there may be 10 apartment complexes where a lot of these people live, and there are problems there, and it's isolated to that. But you don't see any violence. It's the same thing in Chicago. In Chicago, on the news, every day you hear about the crime rate and you see the shooting and the killings. What they don't tell you is that it's like they have all of that in a cage part of Chicago, and the rest of Chicago is like great. Beautiful city. I went to Chicago a year ago for the Netroots convention. I went to Baltimore this year for the Netroots convention. And the city, you hear about the killings in Baltimore. Of course, the crime rate in Baltimore now is very, very way down comparative to before. Chicago, the crime rate is up again. But you go to these cities and you can go to the bars and you can go to the clubs and you can go to the restaurants and it all looks normal. It all looks good. You go to Houston. I see commercials on ads in Houston now saying, get rid of those judges, Democrats. They're letting criminals out. And then they put a black woman on and the black woman says, oh, my, and I don't want to disparage the woman for losing her brother to crime, which is true. It's a bad thing, but it's not the prevalent thing that is happening in this beautiful city, this wonderful city of great things happening, of ethnicity of all over. Great town that you can have food of every type. You can have parties of every type. In fact, we, the Panamanians of Houston, Texas, are having a big bash with los típicos folclóricos y todo esto, a big thing we're having because this is such a great city. But we're being placed in fear because because the instantiation of our economic system that screws you, the same people that screws you are asking you for their vote by misleading you. Look, I find it offensive as somebody who chose this country to be a patriot of. I wasn't born here. I was born elsewhere. I came here on that dream of who the country really is. And from the time I got here, I've watched what, starting with Reagan, what has been done to the intellect of the country. When the mass movements of the 60s started and the 70s and the enlightenment of people started, it was wonderful watching that. And I can tell you, you cannot believe the feeling of disappointment that a country that reveres itself as the first world country has so limited its mindset, I went to one of the best universities in the state and the country, the University of Texas, a progressive bastion then. And the things that we did, the things that we learned, the things that were changed, the things that made us who we are, to watch the fight that we're having, not to keep it and extend it, but just to hold pace. Because we have so far now made ignorance vogue. We have made the acquisition of knowledge something to be, I remember when I got here, well, I'm not going to tell this story till probably later, but I'm not going to tell this story till later. But the concern now is the decline of a nation, not because of migrants come in to take over, because actually what we do need now is more migrants, to tell you the truth. We need people who remember what hard work is all about, what having independent thinking is all about. And what we're seeing right now with folks allowing an intellectual neophyte but a marketing genius to do to you is quite disconcerting to the rest of the world, frightening, especially since what happens when you have somebody like that over a military power like we, second to none, third to none, first. I mean, it's disconcerting for the rest of the world. Now, what I've said is, people, don't despair. I still, a lot of people tell me I'm crazy, but I still have faith in the American people, realizing and remembering that in as much as in 2016, Hillary didn't win the Electoral College, most people in America voted not for the person who promotes hate, not for the person who promotes ignorance, not for the person who promotes the rape of women, and when I say that, I don't say that blatantly. If you watch the Republican convention, what they wanted to centralize on, and they're pulling in a group of machismo type men with that thing. They brought in the WWE and they brought in, I'm a man, and as if being a man means taking advantage of others, as being a man taking advantage of women makes you macho, grabbing on a woman's private parts make you manly. That's not what my dad taught me. My dad taught me quite a bit, something quite differently. But if you listen to Trump and you listen to him talk on the stage yesterday, a woman protested, knock her out. Wow. Is that where we really want to be as a country? Like I tell folks on the blog I wrote yesterday, actually went viral. 36,000 people so far have viewed it. I said, let me tell you something. The race is not as up for grabs as you think. It's Kamala's race. And I can't tell anybody how to vote. I can't do that from here. On my 3 o'clock show, I'll tell you what you need to do. But here I can just tell you the facts. And the facts are simple. The facts are simple. If you believe in democracy, vote for democracy. If you believe in humanity, vote for humanity. If you believe in human rights, vote for human rights. If you believe in a woman's agency to her own body, if you believe a woman should be able to control her body, that I, as a man or woman or whatever, should have no presence in somebody else's human space, body, vote appropriately. If you believe in an economic system where it makes sense for all to prosper. Vote appropriately. If you want to believe in fear, if you want to believe that all those people that look different than you do somehow is a problem, first of all, it's not true. Secondly, it's one thing and one thing that would cause a demise. Today, we have a very special issue to talk about relative to Houston Independent School District. With me today is Sarah Terrell, is a taxpayer who supports public education, has been actively observing and participating in HISD issues for many years. And Jessica Catrit, a parent of a HISD alumni from Westside High and a current sixth grader at Lanier. She says her son graduates out of fifth last year. Look, first of all, ladies, thank you so kindly for being a part of this discussion on politics done right. Before I get started, we're talking about the bonds, but we all know that the Houston Independent School District got taken over. I claim it was done by force. Please tell me in the short terms what happened there. What should concern us?
Well, HISD got taken over by the TEA. Basically, we think because we are a Democrat city and our board was all made up of Democrats and more liberal people who are concerned about our public school system. And so they took it over on a pretext of a law that they had started that says if one school is failing for more than 5 years, then that the only solution is to completely take over the school district. So that's what they did with us. We had one school that triggered that out of 270 schools. So that you can just see right there that it was a pretext. So we've been dealing with the board, all our trustees were out. They appointed this board of managers by TEA appointed them, and the superintendent Mike Miles was also appointed by the TEA, and they've been here since June of 2023.
Now, Jessica, is that constitutional? Is that by Texas constitutional law?
That's a really good question. It's really interesting because we are definitely no longer an independent school district. So when Greg Abbott ordered the takeover of HISD, I feel like our voting rights were stolen. I personally voted for Elizabeth Santos. I voted for her to represent me on the school board, and she won that election. In fact, she won twice. Yet, under this takeover, she was removed and replaced by her opponent, Jeanette Garza Linder, who lost the election. So I very much feel like our votes have been stolen from us.
Which I think is a pretty good assessment. Anyway, let's start talking about the bond. Why don't you start, Sarah, and tell me your thoughts.
I have deep concerns about this bond. It's humongous. It's $4.4 billion. It's the largest one that's ever been suggested in Texas. Our last bond in 2012 was only $1.8 billion. So this is more than twice that amount. It actually will cost $9 billion with interest over time, and it will take 30 years to pay it off. And what this giant bond does to a district like HISD is it sucks up the borrowing capacity for many, many years. Normally, you try to do bonds every so often, but if you've used up all your borrowing capacity, then you can't do that as needs arise or as you try to rotate who's going to benefit from the next project. So I want to also point out that some of the costs in this thing are just really inflated. And what we're getting for the $4.4 billion just doesn't seem like a lot. It's supposed to be directed at elementary and middle schools. We have 160 elementaries and about 39 middles. So that's 200 schools. We're only getting about 39 of them fully rebuilt or partially rebuilt. So that's a very small percentage of 200 schools that are actually going to get a full rebuild and from this enormous bond. And part of that is because the costs are so high that they've listed for these rebuilds. And part of it is also, what other things that they're spending on in the layout of the costs. So let me just give you a couple of examples. We have these costs that are lined out by school. We have two things that we can maybe benchmark them against. Back in 2023, HISD did a facilities survey of all the schools, and they wrote down replacement costs for each one. Now, those are they seem a little bit low to me, but they're not completely out of the question. And the other benchmark we can use is with Alvin ISD, which is also doing a bond this November, and they have both elementary and one middle school on their bond proposal. So, for instance, we will be investing. We have a middle school called Frank Black Middle School. We're going to rebuild it completely for $178 million. The replacement cost estimated 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, was where's it? I forget. It was like 80 million. There it is. It's on my notes. It's 80 million. Alvin Independent School District is proposing to build a middle school for 88 million. So you see that replacement cost and Alvin's costs are in the same league, but they're nowhere near this 178 million that Miles says he needs to rebuild that middle school. And other middle schools that are getting fully rebuilt, like Hamilton and Revere, very similar issues with those costs. And just to give you, like, for instance, Hamilton is 144 million, and Revere is 162. And again, Alvin's going to do a similar school for 88 million. And all these costs are without land. I don't want anyone to think, oh, Houston land costs more. These are not including
because
land.
The land is already there.
And Alvin put the land in a separate part of their bond. So these are just construction costs. A couple of elementaries. The elementaries follow the same pattern. We have a school called Durham Elementary. It's going to get completely rebuilt. It's going to cost $82 million. Its replacement cost was previously estimated as $20 million, which seems too low, but Alvin is doing 3 elementary schools for about $45 million each. So you got Mike Miles saying, I need $82 million for my elementary. And Alvin says they can do it for $45
half
million.
the cost. Yeah. A little more than half.
And we have other elementaries that follow that same pattern. Bonham Elementary is going to cost $121 million. And it's going to be a larger school than Durham. Durham is 82. But again,
I want to tie something in, because I think that is money coming into the system, to his system. I know there's probably no correlation between this bond and the trouble that he got into for having money transferred to Colorado. But I bet that given there is no oversight, why don't you tell me a little bit about that? Given that there's no oversight, we don't know if there would be some mechanism used to take this bond money and move it around these other private charter schools that this guy deals with.
Well, I think it's not. Here's how the mechanism for that would work. In addition to the very few full rebuilds we're going to get out of this deal, every single school in the entire district is going to get a minimum of new HVAC, improved security, and lead abatement. We have schools that are like 38% utilized. We're going to be building we're going to spend $1 billion on 39 schools that have less than 50% utilization. We have another $500 million we're going to spend on schools with less than 75% utilization. So that means we're going to close schools eventually. But first, we're going to fix them up. So Is that going to be a gift to the charter school industry?
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Very possibly. Or the private schools. If the voucher bill passes and we get every state that's had a voucher bill pass, they've had just private schools that charge exactly the voucher amount for their tuition springing up all over the place. And these schools, which are now up to code and somewhat revitalized, are going to be perfect for charters and privates to move into. So that's how you're going to move the money out of the public sector and potentially into the private
and companies
sector.
Like his charter school system can manage them. Jessica, give me your thoughts.
Yeah, well, this is really a good topic. I am voting no on this bond. I've never voted no on a school bond before. And, all of us who are out here speaking out against it, we're all people who strongly believe in public education and would always vote for one. But there is just no trust in this administration. I mean, you brought up that he's being investigated for taking our public money, school money, and funneling it to Colorado. But there's a lot of other things that have happened as well. And honestly, there's nobody who's going to be stopping Mike Miles from doing whatever he wants.
I don't think we established who Mike Miles was. So tell us who Mike Miles is.
Yeah. So he is the state appointed superintendent of HISD that was appointed by Morales. And so he is here transforming our district into his vision. But there's a lot of problems with his vision. It is not research backed. All of our teachers are telling us that the methods that he's instituting have no research backing, and they're in fact harmful to our kids. He has a very checkered history. He was a superintendent in Dallas. They fired him and got rid of him. And now we're here. Then he was this charter school network.
A failed charter school, a financially failed charter school system. Yeah.
And now he's here, and now we're stuck with him. And, he has been, since this takeover has started, he has been intimidating and stalking our teachers, manipulating families, and our teachers are, they're leaving. They're voting with their feet. We've lost 4,000 of 10,000 of our teachers so far, and they're being replaced with unqualified, uncertified.
Yeah.
But as far as the trust goes, as a parent, he again and again has shown that, he talks a good game, but the things he's saying are lies, and he's manipulating us. For example, last year, my child's fine arts magnet was announced as being one of the schools slated to be converted into his new education system this year. At the community meeting for that, parents asked for a guarantee that our principal would stay, and that was the deciding factor for many families in choosing to stay. The administrator there told us that she saw no reason to replace an amazing principal, and as long as Dr. Clark wanted to stay, they wanted her leading our school. Well, after school choice, the deadline closed and families could no longer apply to transfer their kids out. They fired her. We've been told that high-performing schools have autonomy, but in reality, the teachers at our A-rated schools are being forced to follow this rigid NES model or be punished. He is closing our libraries and firing librarians. The libraries are being turned into these barren test prep centers. And the justification for that is they're telling us that they're too expensive. Yet every NES school in the district, every elementary school gets adult-sized spin bikes that the kids can't use that just sit in the way. They tell us we can't afford wraparound specialists that are in charge of ensuring that all kids have what they need to succeed in school. But Miles was able to introduce himself to the district with a $400,000 musical starring himself in mocking the community. We had a child that died in a hot gym in the first week of school, and there was no functioning AED on site during that incident. An investigation of that has found that nurses across our district were begging for replacement batteries for their AEDs and were denied. 170 AEDs were found to be non-functional. And also the people responsible for maintaining our HVAC systems, they were also cut because of budget reasons. So, I don't trust this administration because they lie to us over and over, and they make terrible judgments.
As I see it, what you're saying is you've completely lost trust in this person. So how do you give him trust for a several $billion bond? So let me go back to Sarah here, because Sarah, I think anybody listening to us right now would hear all the grievances that Jessica spoke about and really have to ask the question, why would we support a bond for somebody who this doesn't only come from both of you, but there have been several articles out there documented that documented this person's history to understand that he has no place controlling, first of all, a district of our size, and let alone put the district in the kind of debt that he's going to attempt to put the district in if this bond is passed. I need some closing thoughts from you with whatever else you have to add to the discourse here.
I just can't emphasize enough that if we vote for this bond, we won't get another chance to do a smarter, more effective one later because we will have used our borrowing capacity. And I know some people want to say, well, what about the kids? They're in moldy schools. It's hot. All these things need to be fixed. Absolutely right. But what we're being faced with here is an all or nothing proposition. And I find it quite coercive. And there's no reason why HISD cannot come back to us as early as next May's election dates with a much better, more sensible bond with a smaller footprint. So I view my vote no as number one, a referendum of no on this entire takeover and Mike Miles' performance and his puppet board of managers, as well as a negotiation. So you say you want $4.4 billion. I say no, that's too much. And I also want to say something about the permanence of Mike Miles. What he's trying to do here is leave his physical imprint on us in a forever way, like a toxic forever chemical. So all of these schools, I'm sure, will be built without libraries because, as we all know, he takes the libraries out of his NES schools and turns them into study halls. So our new schools will not have libraries. And then in addition, one of the most expensive things on this whole deal is 3 career technical education centers that are essentially fancy new high schools. And our high schools are already only 84% filled on average. And we rebuilt them all with the 2012 bond money. So it is definitely a boondoggle. And I think that's why the Republican Party of Harris County knows it, and they recommended a no vote. And the Democratic Party of Harris County has recommended a no vote as well. And many organizations are doing the same. So we hope that people will stand up for their rights here in Houston and send that message with that no vote.
I want to expand on something before we go, because you all have laid out quite a bit. First of all, I think Jessica has done a great job of laying out that the person who leads this organization, the HISD, Miles, cannot be trusted, number one. Number two, you've laid out that most of these buildings being built would be overpriced, cost a whole lot more than other similar size campuses have been buildings have been done with, which points out that where is that extra money, or why is it costing that much? And third, if this is a person that has been trustworthy, whose word could not have been trusted to for what he said, what makes one believe that even if you are in a moldy school right now, that your school will be one of the chosen schools to be taken care of within the time frame that you think it's going to be taken care of? So, I mean, I think we need to listen to both Sarah and Jessica's words. So tell the audience that are listening to Jessica in one sentence why you think they should vote similar to how you will vote.
Our votes have been stolen, but this is our chance to vote on something and send a strong message that we won't stand for this, and no trust, no bond.
Sarah?
I want to say to all the conservatives out there, this is taxation without representation, and there is no electoral accountability for either Mike Miles or the puppet board that okay every single thing he does, and the oversight committee that he will appoint, that he will decide who goes on to, is going to be window dressing with the same thing. Anything Mike Miles wants, he's going to get out of these people. He's spending other people's money. Right. That's what it is. He's a profligate spender already. When he came in, we had a $1.1 billion surplus of funds in HISD, and he spent it down by $250 million in the first year on his NES programs. We have nothing permanent to show for that. No new schools, no new buildings, nothing. And so he's just, he definitely spends like it's other people's money, and he can do whatever he wants with it because he's not elected and he's not accountable to a board that's elected. So he just does whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah, there's no one to hold him accountable at all.
We can't give him this money because we'll never get it back, and we'll have no way, absolutely no way, of making sure that it's sensibly well spent.
Sarah Terrell and Jessica Catrit, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you for having us on your show, for the opportunity to talk to this important issue.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.